Hello! Today I'm making an art doll of one of my characters. Her name is Shezi, and she's the quote-unquote main character of my story. Here's her reference picture and what I was basing this off of. First, I start with a tinfoil ball to base the head on. It stays on clay and makes the head lighter, which is helpful for posing. The clay I'm using is called DOS clay. It's a brand, and it's a type of air dry clay that's great. I'd highly recommend it, and it's pretty cheap as far as clay goes. I work out the main shape of the head first, going more based on what Shezi as a character looks like, rather than a realistic snow leopard head. I focused on the larger forms first, and it looks a little goofy, but then I go in and define the details once I'm satisfied with that, doing many revisions and adding clay or taking away clay as necessary. The eyes are cabochons that I painted on the back of, though I recommend if you do this yourself, you paint on a piece of paper and then glue it to the cabochon, because painting directly on the glass often has the paint rub off, which is what happened here. I poked holes for the antennae, which will be made out of this floral wire. I make sure to poke them early while the clay is still wet, so that way they'll stick in her head. Here's the head all finished. The paws are pretty simple to do. I just take a ball of clay, smush it into the right shape, then cut the toes out. On the bottom, I sculpt out the paw pads. These paws are pretty small, so I don't go into too much detail with claws or anything. I also put a hole in the back to connect them with the armature. Now that the clay is dry, it's time to make the armature. I used 12 gauge wire for the main frame, comparing it to another art doll of her brother, Finn, to make sure I get the size and proportions right. Then I measure and bend the legs. Once the main frame is done, I wrap it again 1 or 2 times with the 12 gauge wire, then again with 20 gauge wire to hold it together. Afterwards, I hot glue any cut ends poking out so they don't pierce the fabric, or me, later on. The armature is done and it's time to start sewing. I like to make a pattern for the main body. It helps me get the form correct and helps with sewing a lot, especially because I'm using shorter fur. Because the art doll is small, I trace the armature onto a piece of notebook paper and outline the body shape from there. The fabric I use is a white mink fabric, which has a short fur-like texture but is light and easy to work with. I sew the belly to the 2 sides of the body using a basic stitch. I'll sew the back together later, directly onto the frame. Once the fabric is all cut out, I start wrapping parts of the body in cut up strips of quilt batting to give definition to the limbs. For small art dolls like this, it's a lot easier than stuffing the thin limbs, and gives them a good shape. I stuff the body as I sew. sew together the two parts of the front legs, then attach them using hot glue to the feet and connect them to the body. For the neck, I use a piece of scrap fabric to get the shape of the neck, then cut out a piece of long faux fur fabric. The neck can be a bit tricky because it bends and the shape is usually hard to get. I hot glued the neck fur to the head like I did with the paws. I also added some of the faux fur to the belly to make her look fluffier. Here's how she looks with the body all sewn together. For the tail, I basically marked the length of the tail and how wide I want it to be and then cut it out, then just sewed it on. And the sewing is all done. Here's how she looks. Afterwards, I added some ears made out of felt and the mink fabric on a wire frame and added that to the head. Next up is the trimming, one of my favorite parts. I go in with a pair of scissors and shape up the fur to give it more shape and definition. I especially worked on the tail because it was looking more like an elongated foxtail, and I wanted it to be more like a snow leopard's. Be very careful at this stage because the fur won't grow back. She looks a lot better with her haircut. Now it's time to start painting. I start with the clay parts and apply a base color of this pinkish lavender color along with cream, adding details and markings as I go. Because this art doll is so small and it's meant to be less realistic, I'm not going to fur the face and the markings are going to be more cartoonish. But now it's starting to look like her. I paint the paws with cream on top and her teal paw pad color underneath. Painting the body can be difficult, especially since I don't have an airbrush. Instead, I simply use watered down acrylic. I also use rubbing alcohol to help get the color in more and avoiding crunchiness, which can be difficult sometimes. Fortunately, the mink fabric isn't too bad with water, and over many layers I can define the color. For her markings, her rosettes and stuff, I simply use a Sharpie and color them in. It makes it a little crunchy but turns out great, and is a lot easier than using paint. Now comes the part I was dreading the whole time. Faux fur is notoriously difficult to paint because it does not like getting wet, and it gets all sticky and crunchy when painted, since I don't have an airbrush. However, I was watching another art doll video and one comment saved me. They said you can use pastels and a toothbrush to add color, so that's what I did here. I simply colored the fur and then brushed it in with a toothbrush to give it a fantastic look without ruining the texture of the fabric, all without a hassle. I will warn you, it can rub out over time, so be careful about handling it too much, but for the most part it wasn't a problem here. I also used Sharpies and markers for the darker parts of the markings. Lastly are the finishing touches. I used felt to make the feathers near her eyes. Near her back, I used a combination of felt and this feather line thingy I found at the craft store. Her antennae I just felt glued onto a 20 gauge wire. And we're done! I learned a lot while making this, and it's so rewarding to see my characters brought to life. If you'd like to learn more about making art dolls, I'd recommend checking out other channels like Bubbly Leaf and KP Creations, who will be linked in the description. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a good day.